The Stranger, Albert Camus. Albert Camus. I don't know how you say it. It's French. Whatever. Chapter 2. Just hold me accountable. Make me read more. Alright, Chapter 2. There are no chapter names. It's just 2. Last time we read the translator's notes, Chapter 1. Had to watch a video breaking it down a little bit. It's interesting. As I was waking up, it came to me why my boss had seemed annoyed when I asked him for 2 days off. Today is Saturday. I'd sort of forgotten. But as I was getting up, it came to me. And naturally, my boss thought about the fact that I'd be getting 4 days vacation that way, including Sunday, and he couldn't have been happy about that. But in the first place, it wasn't my fault if they buried my mammon yesterday instead of today. And second, I would have had Saturday and Sunday off anyway. Obviously, that still doesn't keep me from understanding my boss's point of view. I had had a hard time getting up because I was tired from the day before. While I was shaving, I wondered what I was going to do, and I decided to go for a swim. I caught the streetcar to go to the public beach down to the harbor. Once there, I drove into the channel. There were lots of young people. In the water, I ran into Marie Cardona, a former typist in our office whom I'd have a thing for at the time. She did too, I think. But she left soon afterwards, and we didn't have the time. I helped her onto a float as I did. I brushed against her breasts. I was still in the water when she was already lying flat on her stomach on the float. She turned toward me. Her hair was in her eyes and she was laughing. I hoisted myself up next to her. It was nice, and sort of joking around, I let my head fall back and rest on her stomach. She didn't say anything, so I left it there. I had the whole sky in my eyes, and it was blue and gold. On the back of my neck I could feel Marie's heart beating softly. We lay on the float for a long time, half asleep. When the sun got too hot, she drove off and I followed. I caught up with her, put my arm around her waist, and we swam together. She laughed the whole time. On the dock, while we were drying ourselves off, she said, "I'm darker than you." I asked her if she wanted to go to the movies that evening. She laughed again and told me there was a Ferndale movie she'd like to see. Once we were dressed, she seemed very surprised to see I was wearing a black tie, and she asked me if I was in mourning. I told her Mammon had died. She wanted to know how long ago. I said yesterday. She gave a little start, but didn't say anything. I felt like telling her it wasn't my fault, but I stopped myself because I remembered that I'd already said that to my boss. It didn't mean anything. Besides, you already feel a little guilty. By that evening, Marie had forgotten all about it. The movie was funny in parts, but otherwise it was just so stupid. She had her leg pressed against mine. I was fondling her breast. Toward the end of the show, I gave her a kiss, but not a good one. She came back to my place. When I woke up, Marie had gone. She'd explained to me that she had to go to her aunt's. I remembered it was Sunday, and that bothered me. I don't like Sundays. So I rolled over, tried to find the salty smell Marie's hair left on the pillow, and slept until 10. Then I smoked a few cigarettes, still in bed, till noon. I didn't feel like having lunch at Celeste like I usually did because they'd be sure to ask questions, and I don't like that. I fixed myself some eggs and ate them out of the pan, without bread because I don't have any left and I didn't feel like going downstairs to buy some. After lunch I was a little bored and I wandered around the apartment. It was just the right size when Mammon was here. Now it's too big for me, and I've had to move the dining room table into my bedroom. I lived in just one room now, with some saggy straw chairs, a wardrobe whose mirror had gone yellow, a dressing table, and a brass bed. I've let the rest go. A little later, just for something to do, I picked up an old newspaper and read it. I cut out an advertisement for Crucian salts and stuck it in an old notebook where I put things from papers that interest me. I also washed my hands, and then I went out into the balcony. My room looks out over the main street in the neighborhood. It was a beautiful afternoon, yet the pavement was wet and slippery, and what few people there were in a hurry. First, it was the families out for a walk, 2 little boys in sailor suits with trousers below the knees, looking a little cramped in their stiff clothes, and a little girl with a big pink bow and a black patent leather shoes. Behind them, an enormous mother, in a brown silk dress, and the father, a rather frail little man I know by sight. He had a straw hat on and a bow tie and was carrying a walking stick. Seeing him with his wife, I understood why people in the neighborhood said he was distinguished. A little later, the local boys went by, hair greased back, red ties, tight-fitting jackets, with embroidered pocket handkerchiefs and square-toed shoes. I thought they must be heading to the movies in town. Sorry. I thought they must be heading to the movies in town. That was why they were leaving so early and hurrying toward the streetcar, laughing loudly. After them, the street slowly emptied out. The matinees, I think, had all started, I guess. The only ones left were shopkeepers and cats. The sky was clear but dull above the fig trees lining the street. On the sidewalk across the way to the tobacconist brought out a chair, set it out in front of his door, and saddled it, resting his arms on the back. The streetcars packed a few minutes before were almost empty. In the little cafe Chez Pirate, next door to the tobacconist's, that's a lot of holy. The streetcars packed a few moments before were almost empty. In the little cafe Chez Pirate, next door to the tobacconist's, the waiters were sweeping up the sawdust in the deserted restaurant inside. It was Sunday, all right. I turned my chair around and set it down, like the tobacconists, because I found it was more comfortable that way. I smoked a couple of cigarettes, went inside to get a piece of chocolate, and then went back to the window to eat it. Soon after that, the sky grew dark, and I thought we were in for a summer storm. Gradually, though, it cleared up again. But the passing clouds had left a hint of rain hanging over the street, which made it look darker. I sat there for a long time and watched the sky. At 5 o'clock, some streetcars pulled up, clanging away. They were bringing back gangs of fans from the local soccer stadium. They were crowded onto the running boards and hanging from the handrails. The streetcars that followed brought back the players, whom I recognized by the little athletic bags. They were shouting and singing at the tops of their lungs that their team would never die. Several of them waved to me. One of them even yelled up to me, "We beat 'em!" And I nodded, as if to say yes. From then on, it was a steady stream of cars. The sky changed again. Above the rooftops, the sky had taken a reddish glow. And even coming onto the streets came to life. And with evening coming on, the streets came to life. The way these are structured makes it really hard for me to read them sometimes. The sky changed again. Above the rooftops, the sky had taken a reddish glow, and with evening coming on, the streets came to life. And with evening coming on, the streets came to life. Okay, I got it. People were straggling back from their walks. I recognized the distinguished little man among the others. Children were either crying or lagging behind. Almost all at once, the moviegoers spilled out into the neighborhood theaters into the streets. The young men among them were gesturing more excitedly than usual, and I thought they must have seen an adventure film. The ones who had gone to the movies in town came back a little later. They looked more serious. They were still laughing, but only now and then, and they seemed tired and dreamy. But they hung around anyway, walking up and down the sidewalk across the street. The local girls, bareheaded, were walking arm in arm. The young men had made sure they would have to bump right into them if they would make. The young men had made sure they would have to bump right into them, and then they would make cracks. The girls giggled and turned their heads away. Several of the girls whom I knew waved to me. Then the street lamps came on all of a sudden and made the first stars appearing in the night sky grow dim. I felt my eyes getting tired from watching the street filled with so many people and lights. The street lamps were making the pavement glisten, and the light from the streetcars would glint off someone's shiny hair, or off a smile or a silver bracelet. Soon afterwards, the streetcars running less often and the sky already blue above the streets and lamps, the neighborhood emptied out, almost imperceptibly, until the first cat slowly made its way across the now deserted street. Then I thought maybe I ought to have some dinner. My neck was a little stiff from resting my chin on the back of the chair for so long. I went downstairs to buy some bread and spaghetti, did my cooking, and ate standing up. I wanted to smoke a cigarette at the window, but the air was getting colder, and I felt a little chilled. I shut my windows, and as I was coming back, I glanced at the mirror and saw a corner of my table with the alcohol lamp next to some pieces of bread. It occurred to me that, anyway, one more Sunday was over. that Mammon was buried now, that I was going back to work, and that really nothing had changed. That's chapter 3. These are pretty short. There's no table of contents. How many chapters are there? I mean, granted, it's a short book, but 6, I think. There's only 5 chapters to this thing. I could crank this out today. That's how much is left. And then there's acknowledgments. I could crank out the 4th chapter. Or the 3rd chapter. I might want to watch a movie. Or recap that. So my understanding, try and understand the book, the chapter. I'm going to try and push myself to retain it more. I'm drawing a blank. I like this lighting a lot better though. It's a lot more endearing. It's not fucking like washed white side flooding me, right? As soon as I cover part, like certain things will get washed out the way it adjusts itself. I have to sit just far enough away or else it'll fucking start washing me out. So a lot of that was him talking about like him just sitting out of his balcony, smoking a cigarette and observing lots of things happening, people going to movies. He had sex with a girl that used to be a typist. Yeah. So at the end of chapter 1, he had just finished his funeral, Mammon's funeral. He went to bed, slept for like 12 hours. Then Saturday came, I think, or Sunday. I think this is Saturday. This is Saturday. Chapter 2 opens up to Saturday. Talking about how his boss was unhappy that he got an extra 2 days off for his Mammon's funeral. And that he was going into weird detail about how, like, oh yeah, he would be very upset because the weekend was coming and I had 2 days off, so there would be 4 days I'd have off, and he wouldn't like that. It's like really weird. That's not how normal people talk. Again, it could be the translation, but I think that even with grammar included, this doesn't really make much sense. Or it makes sense, but it's like weird the way he's wording it. He had a hard time getting up, and while he was shaving, he decided he was going to go for a swim. Took a streetcar, which I assume means bus. It's 1940s. This came out. Dove into the channel. There were lots of young people. He ran into Marie Cardona, who was a former typist in an office he'd had in his office, which is his job. His job is at an office, and she was a former typist. Okay. They ran into her. They started hanging out. Like, one of the first things he says is, I helped her onto her float, and as I did, I brushed against her breasts. What? Are you okay, dog? He asked her to go see a movie. She said, yeah, I want to go see a new Fernandel movie. Then they got dressed after swimming. He just, like, Mammon died yesterday. He's like a weird, the way he converses is greater. So the movie was so stupid. Her leg handling her breast. He gave her a kiss, but it wasn't a good one. Then she came back to his place. He woke up. She'd gone. She had to go to her aunt's. It was Sunday. He rolled over, smelt the spot where her hair was, fell back asleep till about 10. Ate some breakfast. And then had some lunch eventually. Wandered around the apartment, talked about how since Mammon died, the apartment felt a lot bigger, right? It was just the right size when she was around. Now that she's gone, it feels a little bit too big. And he moved the dining room table into his bedroom. Yeah. He lives just one room now with some saggy straw chairs, dressing table, wardrobe with a mirror that's gone almost completely yellow from age, I think. Brass bed, reading a newspaper, cutting out parts, and then he just kind of like sits at the balcony and just observes stuff. It's an interesting. Alright. So essentially, chapter 2, he's just talking about he got up, he woke up after a long slumber, like 12 hours, assumingly. He gets up, shaves, decides to go for a swim, sees an old coworker, hangs out, they go see a movie together. Invited to a party? Let me watch a review of this chapter, see if I got it correctly. Three and a half minute video.
There was a moment there where I really thought it was going to be
Okay. I like this guy. I watched his summary of chapter 1. It was interesting. It was helpful.
In part 1, chapter 2 of The Stranger, Marceau forgets for a moment that it's Saturday morning. He thinks his boss seemed annoyed at him for taking time off to attend his mother's funeral, as doing so gave Marceau a long weekend. Marceau maintains that this situation is not his fault. He shaves and decides to go for a swim. When he arrives at the channel, he meets Marie, a former typist at Marceau's office. They swim together, and a sexual chemistry sparks between them. After the swim, they go to a movie. Marie is surprised to see Marceau's black tie, indicating that he is in mourning, but she doesn't question him about it. He thinks again of saying it's not his fault about the funeral being yesterday, but ultimately he decides it doesn't matter. During the movie, Marceau kisses Marie and fondles her breasts. Then they go to his place and have sex. The next morning, Marie is gone. She's left to visit her aunt. Marceau remembers that it's Sunday and is annoyed. He does not like Sunday. He decides not to eat at his usual restaurant, Celeste's, because people might ask him questions about Mama's funeral. Marceau eats lunch and wanders around his apartment, reads a newspaper, washes his hands, and goes out on the balcony. The street slowly empties, and Marceau notices empty streetcars and a waiter sweeping a restaurant. He smokes cigarettes, eats chocolate, and watches the sky grow dark. Marceau sees soccer fans loaded in streetcars. As twilight descends, the street comes back to life. People exit a movie theater and seem excited about the film. The street lamps come on, and Marceau feels tired from watching the street filled with so many people and lights. Soon the neighborhood empties and the street becomes deserted. Marceau eats dinner and looks in the mirror, noticing his alcohol lamp, a type of candle, and a piece of bread on a table. Marceau thinks that Sunday is over. His mother is buried, and tomorrow he will go back to work. Really, nothing had changed. In part 1, chapter 2, the theme of the meaninglessness of life is suggested when Marceau nonchalantly mentions that he wants to take a swim the day after his mother's funeral. Marceau is going about his life as if nothing traumatic has happened. He goes from listlessly wandering around his apartment to describing people passing by on the street. Nothing stands out because for Marceau, nothing has meaning. But Marceau's relationship with Marie emphasizes the theme of the physical life. Sensualist Marceau comes to the fore. Marceau describes the sensory details, such as the sky in my eyes and Marie's heart beating softly. However, the sun, Marceau's persistent antagonist, drives him and Marie into the water.
Okay. I have about a good summary of it. Alright. 20-minute stream just to read one chapter and gain a summary of it. I liked it. I like it so far. I'm coming around to it. It was a little weird at first. I didn't really understand it because I didn't understand what I was going into with this. I've heard some people say it's a cosmic horror book. I've heard some people say it's a deep philosophical text. I guess it could be both. I don't know. but it's an interesting read. I haven't read many books, like I've said numerous times before, so this is kind of different for me. So, but I like it so far. All right, bye bye.